short chapter, I want to talk about being an active bystander, okay? Which sounds like a little bit of a weird thing to talk about, but we're talking about interpersonal success, which really means coming back to the missive that resilience is a team sport. And if we don't become a part of creating the culture that we want to work in, well, the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. And so when we are frustrated by working with people, or when our culture doesn't help lift us up and improve our well-being, we also need to acknowledge that that might be happening to other people around us too. And what can we do to help lift them up? So to talk about what an active bystander is, I want to give you the kind of origins of the story. And it's a little bit gruesome and I apologize, but the term active bystander was effectively coined around an incident in the 80s where a woman in America was murdered in the courtyard overlooked by dozens of apartment buildings. And the story goes, though as time goes on, more and more is coming out that questions this story, but the story went at the time, and the headlines at the time were that a woman was murdered and dozens of people heard or saw it happening and did nothing. So there were dozens, quite literally, of people in their apartments who heard a woman being murdered, not quickly, slowly. It happened over a period of the perpetrator left and came back. And nobody called the police. Nobody intervened. Nobody helped. And the simplest explanation from this, from a human psychology perspective, is just that everybody thought that somebody else would. Combine that with a little bit of I don't want to put my safety on the line. And effectively, a woman lost her life because nobody was an active bystander. They would be what we would refer to as a passive bystander. They just let it happen around them. Okay. So gruesome story aside, when we are in the workplace and somebody shows these uncivil behaviors, when somebody is snappy, when somebody is condescending to the new grad, when somebody, is gossiping in the room with you, you get to choose whether you are an active or a passive bystander in that situation. And if you want a culture where people don't gossip, step one is don't gossip, okay? But step two is to find the courage, if you can, to help other people to not gossip. If you want a culture where people feel safe from incivility, don't be uncivil, and also call other people out on incivility. So an active bystander is somebody who is not necessarily in a position of power, okay? And this is important because a lot of people think, oh, well, it's my leader's job to deal with the culture. But A, your leader is often not in the room when the gossip is happening. And B, no amount of policies that they write down or words they stick on a wall actually change the culture if the people who have to live it don't live it. So to be an active bystander does not assume a higher level of authority or power over the situation as anybody else in the room, all right? Why they matter? Frankly, because if you don't do it, who will? Behavior you walk past is the behavior you have accepted. So if you've got a new staff member or a young impressionable grad in the room and they see 2, 3, 4 other staff members sitting through somebody having a rant about your boss, or they see it being okay to be snappy to somebody or being rude or rolling your eyes or sitting through a meeting and saying nothing about something you disagree with and then whinging about it afterwards, this is now what they believe to be your workplace culture. Right? And how do we do it? Well, that's what we're really going to talk about, okay? A little bit of how do we do it, a little bit of some real world examples, okay? But the how do we do it often will depend on you and your courage and your personality and your comfort level. Remembering, though, that it is uncomfortable for everybody, okay? So a lot of people use the excuse of, oh, I'm an introvert, that's really uncomfortable. Yeah, it is. It's uncomfortable even for those of us who are extroverted and have more experience with it. But A, the only way to get better at it is to practice it. And B, you just have to keep saying, if not me, then who? Who else is better placed to do this than you? But when we get to the nitty-gritty of how, all right, the idea is to base it a little bit on the context of what's happening, how safe you and others feel, and choose a best way forward. So there's they call it the 4 Ds, right? The first D is direct, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Directly call out whatever you just saw, all right? You call it out in the moment, and when you're in a safe zone that you feel comfortable in your own skin, and you can just actually say to people, that sounded a little condescending. Did you mean it like that? Putting a question on the end is a really good way to reduce the conflict level of calling somebody out. So rather than just straight out saying that was condescending, Make sure that you frame it and how you perceived it. That came across as a little condescending. Did you mean it that way? Softens it while still really clearly calling it out. So, you can talk about, I know you might be joking, but to some people that might have felt offensive. Did you feel that way? Or you might want to try, the gossip situation. Somebody's trying to engage you in gossip. Oh, I don't feel comfortable talking with people outside of the room. Have you talked to them about it yet? So just directly, this isn't okay. And then you can soften the conflict level by asking them a question, an open-ended question that allows them to save face and allows them to go, oh yeah, of course I didn't mean it like that at all. It doesn't make it such a harsh moment, okay? This is what I would encourage you to do. Always, if you can, if you have the wherewithal to do this, this is the most effective way to call out incivility. However, I'm not totally cruel, and I know that many people don't always or even often have the courage to call these things out. So other options is another D, distract. All right, just move on. Make a silly joke, deflect, or before we go any further, can we just take a break? Just find a pause in the situation, all right? Cut it off, make it, again, remember this is really about making clear, I do not accept this behavior, and especially if anybody's watching, this is not a normal and okay thing that other people can do. So we just go something that goes, we're not going down that road, all right? Just, oh, look at the time, moving on now. Just move forward, change the conversation or the trajectory of the conversation. All right. If you're not quite up for distraction or you can't work out how, then you've got delegation. All right. And that might mean asking your leader to step up, asking someone who you happen to know is more confident than you, perhaps, at calling people out to step up. And, making sure that you talk to somebody who is actually in a position to do something rather than just gossip about it afterwards, okay? Because otherwise we're falling into the incivility trap too, all right? So you can delegate, hey, this person made this comment. I know that it made Bobby uncomfortable. Would you mind having a word to them about it? That's all that needs to be said, okay? Don't entertain gossip about it. And then if you can't do those things either, you can delay engaging. This one isn't my favorite simply on the fact that I think for other witnesses in the room, the behavior wasn't called out. And so they kind of maybe are more under the assumption that that behavior is accepted and tolerated now. So it's not my favorite, but of course we acknowledge we can only do what we can do. So delaying your intervention to a time when it's quieter or where you're more comfortable or where you've gotten more comfortable and found some words to say, that is of course okay too. It's better than not calling it out. So that might be you approach them afterwards and just be like, oh, that sounded off. Are you okay? Or I noticed you were a little bit terse in that meeting. What's going on for you? You may also want to engage with the person who was snapped at, or who was condescended to, or who was, if there was a victim of that incivility, check in with them later too. Validate them and be a support person. All right, so that's what bystander actively looks like. So to do it in real time, all right, we really want to think about how are we going to, in a low conflict way that doesn't escalate the scenario, call people out on this sort of stuff. So quick examples, all right, how could we respond to somebody, rolling their eyes when their boss says this is the new policy or this is the new protocol, and somebody goes, oh, we all know that won't work. So what are you going to do? The boss didn't hear it. Maybe it was muttered under the breath, all right? I'm going to give you some time rather than just answer it for you. One of the 4 Ds. You could call it out directly. You could just be like, why don't you share your ideas with the group? What's a better idea? Or it sounds like you have your reservations. Do you want to express them more loudly? If you're brave enough to do the direct, that'd be good. You could do a distract, which is just, well, let's talk about that later. You could be a delegate, tell the boss afterwards. Bobby has some concerns about that. You may want to talk to them. Or you can delay, which is check in with that person afterwards. Hey, I noticed you didn't seem that happy. Do you want to brainstorm together what we could do to take a different solution to the boss? Yeah. So in none of those options are you being combative. Depending on how well you know the person in the situation, the direct one does feel higher risk, but it's also the best way to do it in terms of getting change if incivility is a common thing in your workplace. Not when somebody, oh, did you hear that they're cutting the staff numbers again? Right? You could directly approach that. You could just simply say, it doesn't sound like we're talking to the people who can answer the questions properly. Should we do that? All right. Do you know that to be true? You can distract and you just be like, What have you got for lunch? Something totally unrelated. Smile and nod. Moving on now. You can delegate. Again, that might be speaking to that person's boss. This person is concerned about this. Can we bring it up in the next team meeting and make sure we get to the truth of it? Or we can delay. If that situation is, in a big crowd and it's not right to raise it now, you could say to them afterwards, oh, hey, I feel like that added to some negativity in the room when people are already a little on edge. Let's work out together how we could, raise it more constructively. What about this one? Oh, Becky was late again today. Someone walks into the tea room, sits down next to you while you're enjoying your lunch, and just sits down and starts gossiping about Becky being late. My strong recommendation is always the direct, all right? I don't like to talk about people who aren't in the room. Have you talked to Becky? Yeah? Or we distract. What have you got for your lunch? Or we delegate, or we delay. Okay, delay might be simply when you've gathered your thoughts afterwards. Hey, before, remember you wanted to talk about Becky? I've been thinking about that, and I realize in hindsight why it made me uncomfortable. It felt like it bordered a little bit on gossip, and I feel bad for Becky. So, the point with all of these is you don't have to be highly conflict oriented to be able to take responsibility for the fact that the culture that you're experiencing is the culture that other people are experiencing too. And while we want to believe that it's our boss's job to control the environment around us, it's simply impossible for them to do so because it's the people on the ground who are experiencing it in real time before anybody's delegated to your boss who decide whether that behavior gets ignored and everybody around them goes, oh, okay, so this is what we accept here or not.